Um, and they asked for that manufacturers of sunscreens that contain these nanoparticles be forced to file new drug approval applications, and that they should recall all of the products that were currently on the market. Now, that citizen petition is still pending. I think that the more science accumulates on the issue, the more comfortable everybody, even some of the groups that were originally concerned, are with the fact that these products really don't pose a risk, that the skin does serve as a functional barrier to the kinds of nanoparticles in these products. But this, has gone so far as to be a subject of concern in Congress. The keynote speaker at a conference this past year had just finished a stint on the Hill, and as he put it, the question that was being asked up there was, ultimately, is the future of this technology going to hinge on whether nanotechnology is safe to slather on our children, which is a pretty peculiar standard to apply to a technology with as many potentially diverse applications as we've heard over the last couple of days. Shifting gears a little bit, another issue that's gained some traction, leaving aside questions of safety, is questions of labeling. The whole issue of right to know. Do consumers have a right to know that they're getting nanotechnology, whether it's in their food or on their cosmetics? The standard that FDA applies is whether there's a material fact has been omitted with respect to consequences that could result from use of the product. And so FDA's big issue really, is there a safety concern here that needs to be disclosed? And FDA has litigated on this in many contexts with many kinds of products over the course of the years. It very jealously defends its decisions about what kind of labeling should be required or should not be required. And an example from the biotech world is starts with this humble creature right here, which I think you'd have to admit that is a pretty impressive source of milk. And the question is a trick question because the answer really depends on whether the cow is being given a particular drug that you might know by the trade name of Posilac. But the answer is it could be anywhere from 6 to 7 gallons per day. Pretty astonishing in my view. So the drug Posilac, or recombinant bovine somatotropin, is a bioengineered animal drug that FDA approved in 1994. And it's a hormone given to cattle to increase their milk production. And FDA approved it after conducting an extensive review, not just of the safety of the drug for the animals, but the safety of any tissues or products that would be derived from the cow, including its milk. Nonetheless, FDA was sued over its approval, and FDA won. And FDA was also sued to try to compel disclosure that if milk came from a cow that had been given RBST, that should be indicated in the labeling of the milk. FDA defended its decision not to require that labeling and also prevailed on that point. And the issue really is kind of a difficult one to get a hold of because we tend to focus our discussions on safety, but a lot of the discussion here doesn't really necessarily revolves around safety. There are some issues with respect to the potential effect on small farms. Are they going to be at a disadvantage because they can't afford to administer this drug to their cattle, whereas the larger producers can? So it's a good example of how something that starts off as a safety-related issue can gain traction and acquire a whole set of other facets that really don't have much of anything to do with product safety. And I can't resist pointing out that we're holding this conference in a country that never approved RBST, even though the reviewing authorities here in Canada concluded that there really wasn't a safety issue with respect to the milk derived from the cow. There might or might not be a safety issue with respect to increase in incidence of mastitis and whatnot, but they really sort of gave a nod to the fact that there might be social dimensions to this problem that deserve further consideration. So if you drink milk derived from a cow that has been given RBST while you're in Canada, that milk was imported from the United States. It was not produced here. And this is the kind of thing that you will see today. If you surf the web, you'll see these kinds of claims. They have a symbol, RBST-free. Yogurt is made, here we are, assuring the consumer that no artificial growth hormones, the yogurt inside is RBST free, which really sort of suggests that RBST is something that you add to yogurt as opposed to something that you give to a cow. The fact is that there really is no significant difference between milk derived from a cow given RBST and one not given RBST. But these kinds of claims start to suggest that maybe there's a health, maybe there's a safety issue. I think something that's worth pointing out in our federal system is that whatever FDA says isn't necessarily the last word, and more is not the last word because we have our 50 states. And unless state law is explicitly overridden or preempted by federal law, there's always that possibility that states are going to get in on the act. So when all this controversy was brewing over RBST, Monsanto came to FDA and said, we need you guys to do something because these claims are getting out of hand. FDA took some action, but by and large it said, look, this is not really a public health issue. We're not going to spend a lot of time and effort on this. The battle went to the states. And so now what we've seen over the course of the last 5-7 years is state by state this battle being played out in these boards of agriculture over what should be done about RBST labeling. And it's hard not to think of this example when you start looking to see what's happening with nano, because the more people question whether the oversight is adequate, the more you have things like these local restrictions on nano that are coming into play in Berkeley. California issued a call, I believe it was toward the end of last year, for data on carbon nanotubes. And so there are jurisdictions, both cities and states, that are, where the issue is going to come up. How much of this research do we want going on in our backyard? Do we want to start compelling submission of information about where this research is being conducted? Do we want to exclude some of these products altogether? Do we want nano-free zones? And I think on the whole, probably the zeal for that kind of approach is going to be tempered by the fact that everybody wants to retain exactly the kind of industries that are invested in nanotechnology. I haven't seen something like this for nanotech. I pulled it for biotech. This is from a McKinsey press briefing that was held last year, so they're a consulting firm. But I talked a little bit about red nano versus green nano. But in industry, they also talk about white. And so here in the biotech context, they talk about red biotech and green biotech and the white biotech. And you see some of the applications for the white biotech on the right-hand side, the biofeedstock, the bioprocesses, the bioproducts. I think one thing that can give you solace when you think about these issues is that at least to date, excuse me, in the public mind, the public seems to have been able to maintain this distinction between green biotech and red nanotech. And they're willing to tolerate a certain amount of risk with red biotech, where with green biotech, the tolerance of risk remains extremely low. What'll be interesting to see is what happens as white biotech comes online and you have more and more products being sped to market in that category. Shifting over to nano, I think we're probably going to see a similar dynamic where we're going to see the green nanotech applications that we're already seeing, but a lot of questions are being raised about those. Do we really need to have that in foods? Do we really need to have that in cosmetics? Then we have the red nanotech, which I think there's a lot of enthusiasm among the public for the kinds of innovations that you all have been talking about for the last 2 days. But then I think the big question mark is with the white nanotech. And I haven't seen any good data that give us any projections for what the relative market penetration of those three sectors is going to be. There is some data that dates back to 2004 that suggests that white nanotech, the industrial applications, could exceed the medical, the red and the green applications, if you will, by several orders of magnitude. Could just absolutely dwarf whatever goes on in the biomedicine sector, and so that introduces a whole other dynamic, because as I was getting ready to come here, this hit my my inbox. It's litigation news, so it's the latest issue of the American Bar Association's section of litigation. And I don't know if you can see it there, but it says, the rise of nanotech litigation. And you can see the little nanobots there pictured on the front. And once you get to the article inside, This one is really primarily about EPA and whether EPA's oversight is adequate.